The Texas Freedom Network was founded in 1995 by Cecile Richards, who, sorry, the lights are difficult here. When Richards became aware how the State Board of Education was being hijacked by the religious right. Samantha Smoot, who succeeded Cecile Richards as Texas Freedom Network's president, addressed one of our conventions here in San Antonio many years ago. We are very pleased to have on hand today Texas Freedom Network's current president and executive director, Val Benavidez. She became president in November 2020 and was previously the Texas Freedom Network's chief program officer. Val has worked for numerous nonprofit advocacy groups, including the Texas Immigrant and Refugee Coalition, League of Young Voters, Generational Alliance, as well as serving as Executive Director of ProTex for a progressive network for a progressive Texas. Val is a member of the Board of Directors for the Workers' Defense Project. She is the proud daughter and granddaughter of Mexican immigrants, farm workers, railroad builders, and all-around rebel rousers. Please give a warm welcome to Val Benavidez, who is the embodiment of FFRF's convention theme, Do Mess with Texas, and whose speech is entitled, As Politicians Mess Around, We Organize. Val?
Hello, good morning, everyone. Thank you. I'm Val Benavidez, the Executive Director of the Texas Freedom Network, and I am so proud to be here and included with such an esteemed lineup of speakers for this whole conference. And even more importantly than that, I'm happy to be in a room with you all, because you are people we are like-minded people who believe that we can be the change that we need to see in this world. And we are the people who push our states and our nation to uphold their promise, and that this promise is that we can be the best version of a democracy that we can be. So here in Texas, our last Democratic governor, our beloved Ann Richards, left the stage to say in 1995. Texas Freedom Network was founded that same year by her daughter, Cecile Richards, and for the last 27 years, Texas Freedom Network has been fighting for our shared beliefs in equality and social justice, and pushing back against the far right's weaponization of faith in Texas. And just to note, the Texas Freedom Network and every one of you in this room have been doing our part to piss off the religious right ever since then. Just so you know, they would like us to stop, and we will not. Instead, we will all be relentless. So, how did we get here? Since 1994, a wave of religious extremism has washed over Texas politics, creating the false narrative that we're a deeply red state. So, in many ways, what we are is a non-voting and a non-civically engaged state, and that is by design. It is by design of voter suppression. So, people outside of Texas, and sadly, far too many people living here, have been inundated with this lie, and that we all hold the same conservative values and that we fear progress. And perhaps the most devastating lie is that we all believe in one religion and we should be governed by Christianity regardless of the separation of church and state. The result has been the injection of the religious right's extreme, unpopular agenda into every corner of our lives. So this is our science lessons, social studies curriculums, the hallways of our public schools where they've been forced to now hang "Donated in God We Trust" signs, public libraries, the doctor's offices, kids' sports teams, public bathrooms. We see their influence literally everywhere in this state. Under the guise of religion, conservatives and far-right Christian nationalists have used their power to strip us of our freedoms including the religious freedoms they so often claim while spewing cruelty and hate speech. The radical right and religious extremists have been attempting to control Texas for decades. TFN was created to fight back against this very thing. So I truly believe that Ann Richards did her part to piss off the far right, because since then, radical right and religious extremists have been attempting to control the state. In 1995, Cecile Richards attended her first Texas State Board of Education meeting. Have any of you heard of the Texas State Board of Education? There's a lot of things that happen there. As the daughter of the last Democratic governor, Ann Richards, and a progressive leader in her own right, Cecile was no stranger to the religious right's appetite for censorship, but their attempts to hijack textbook adoptions and imprint their agenda within education was still shocking to her to witness. So during that meeting, she passed this note, that's right there, that says to a friend, "It's worse than I imagined." And 1 month later, she founded the Texas Freedom Network to be a counter to this radical religious right in the state, to be a place where Texans could organize and show what the vast majority of us do believe in, and it's not that. And that agenda was true then, and it is still steadfastly true to this day. Almost 3 decades later, TFN is still that counter to the far right in Texas, but we have become so much more. So for almost 30 years, wow, we should have been out of business, right, by now? That's not happening. We have been this watchdog organization in Texas. So our work seeks to bring together faith leaders, young people, and communities of color in support of a broad progressive agenda in Texas, in a very changing Texas, I will note. With roots as an educational advocacy organization, our reach has grown to encompass organizing on a broad range of issues, from textbook censorship and book banning to LGBTQIA+ equality, reproductive freedom, climate justice, criminal justice reform, and voting rights. We ensure that progressive voices, especially the voices of young people, people of color, and progressive people of faith, are leading our movement. Through political endorsements, legislative organizing, and testimony, robust voter registration drives, and grassroots organizing, we are at the forefront of the issues impacting Texans today. Our work is actively reshaping the political landscape of a new Texas that is younger, incredibly diverse, and more progressive. We're making sure that all Texans are represented from the school board to the state capitol. Okay, there we go. I do not normally put slides like that about myself in here, but our comms team insisted, so here we go. So I am a Texas organizer. That's what I came up in this work doing. So I have been at TFN for almost 15 years. So while I am new to being the executive director, I am definitely not new to this work. We've grown this organization and have expanded it into 3 programs. So if you've known Texas Freedom Network for a long time, you're probably learning more about the Texas Rising program and the Just Texas program as well. Texas Rising is our youth organizing program that's geared towards young Texans of color, and that was one of my early initiatives at TFN. That initiative was really important to me because growing up here, going to the University of Texas, are there any Longhorns out there with me? Woohoo! All right. That was the place that I became politically active for the first time. I became a student organizer. I learned with organizing on campus what a profound change in my trajectory occurred because of that work. Like before that, I was going to go into science and different science work, and then after that, I was going to be an organizer and work for political organizations. So prior to becoming the head of the organization, I served as TFN's chief program officer, and I've worked for numerous nonprofit advocacy organizations, including the Texas Immigrant and Refugee Coalition, the League of Young Voters, and I've also served as the executive director of a different organization called ProTex, Network for a Progressive Texas, and have been and was an active board member of the Workers' Defense Project. So each of those experiences brought back and has driven my passion for this work, and as I've seen the immense cruelty and constant assaults at the hands of the right wing in Texas, these are the types of organizing efforts and the people and the community that show me the opposite of that bring me back, just like you all here do, that we are what we are fighting for. So also, another piece of this is I was born in Austin, but I was raised in Kerrville, so I'm from a small town. I'm the proud daughter of a first-generation Mexican immigrant, and I'm fourth-generation Mexican-American on the other side. My family were farm workers, they were railroad builders, they were shopkeepers, they were members of the military, and most of all, they were civically engaged. So I grew up seeing Ann Richards' cutout of her victory on our fridge, a newspaper cutout. I don't know how many people still do that in the world today, but an actual cutout on the fridge. And that I saw every day, right? These were things I saw. And so I grew up with that. And I learned from my family, my grandparents would make me call their congressman for them. So I would have to be a part of them hosting backyard fajita plate fundraisers for local candidates. And that's how I learned how my voice and my vote were powerful. So, where are we now? Let's switch forward. The current political moment that we find ourselves in. So even after 3 decades in this work, we at the Texas Freedom Network, and I'm sure everyone in this room, find ourselves in a political moment where the far right's influence over our daily lives feels stronger than ever, despite society's growingly, increasingly less religious and more progressive population. For instance, we have done research just this year. We know that 60% of Texas voters support access to abortion and do not see abortion as a religious issue. Yet, our freedoms over our own body and futures has been taken away from us, against the will of the people. So our reaction, what is our reaction to what politicians are doing? Go ahead, mess with Texas. While you do that, we will organize it. So, how has our work evolved to meet this moment? As we engaged in educational advocacy and fought the barrage of censorship from religious extremism at the State Board of Education, we saw how education was just one piece of the religious rights assault on our democracy and our freedoms. When we began to expand our focus to a wider slate of progressive issues, it became overwhelmingly clear that the beginning of grassroots organizing that we had done and always have done is the fundamental piece to keep winning and to move forward to winning in this state. So whether we're lending our leadership abilities to creating new coalitions or building connections with Texans across the state, we know by investing in communities, we uplift the voices that need to be heard and stir progressive change. So the power of 3. Our deep focus on organizing and expansion of issues has led to the creation of 3 focus areas of our work: Texas Freedom Network, which is the umbrella, Just Texas, and Texas Rising. So Texas Rising. Texas Rising is an organizing project recognizing and uplifting young people of color who are continuously impacted by the draconian laws Texas politicians are pushing today. The program runs robust voter registration, endorses chosen candidates that are chosen by the student leaders, and empowers the next generation of activists to lead our movement. Through our student chapter model, we're touching college campuses across the state, and the power of young people's voices in our state's democracy is growing every year. Every electoral cycle, young people in Texas have record youth voter turnout, every cycle. That is not like a... Yes, exactly. So right now, Texans under the age of 30 make up 43% of the population of the state, and soon they will be 1/3 of all eligible voters in this state. So this election cycle, we've registered about 15,000 young Texans this year. Collectively, since we started this program several cycles ago, about 100,000 in total. Texas Rising has also engaged in local advocacy across the state, fighting for climate justice, advocating for decriminalization policies, demanding that district attorneys not prosecute people for access to health care, including abortion, and so much more. They are truly an inspiration. Just Texas. So, in a room where we are talking about being free from religion, I'm going to talk a little bit about religion. So, what I want to talk about is Just Texas. Just Texas was founded in 2013, just after the legislative session, the same year of Wendy Davis's historic 13-hour filibuster to prevent, yes, that's exactly, to prevent a vote on a restrictive abortion bill, HB 2. We had thousands of people in our state house that night while Wendy was speaking out against this cruel bill, and many of those folks were clergy that TFN had brought in to testify. So via our Just Texas project, TFN has built connections with clergy and faith communities that are dedicated to social justice as a key component of their faith. And in 2016, the Just Texas team created a process to educate congregations on the need to speak about abortion access and reproductive freedom to destigmatize shame attached to that in houses of worship. So we walk them through training on how to support values for reproductive freedom and designate the congregations as part of this process as religious freedom congregations. We're particularly proud of how Just Texas brings people of faith and non-faith together to combat the harmful narrative that all religious people support censorship and oppression. All religions are welcome and represented at Just Texas, and we fight to destigmatize abortion in faith communities, lift up LGBTQIA+ equality, and uphold other progressive values that historically have been demonized by the religious right. So Texas Rising. Texas Rising and Just Texas live under the complete umbrella that is Texas Freedom Network to build an unstoppable movement. While we now work on abortion advocacy, criminal justice reform, climate justice, LGBTQIA equality, and so much more, education is still one of the cornerstones of our bold work to defend democracy. Cecile had no idea what she was getting us into when she went to that meeting. So this year was no exception. Through our Teach the Truth campaign, we spent countless hours empowering communities to take action for public education. We recruited Texans from all walks of life to testify at the SBOE. We advocated tirelessly for more inclusive social studies standards, pushing against the narrative of CRT. And next year, this will be no shock to you all in the room, we will have our hands full monitoring science textbooks. So, science textbooks will come back up. We will follow the review process. We will make sure that there is adherence to the standards and what has come through. We have fought, as many of you remember, about a decade ago, a very hard fight for many, many years in the battle over creationism and evolution, right? And other components that we were able to make significant change to really terrible proposals. However, we are now dealing with a board that has just elected and will elect, based on their primaries and moving through the general election, at least 3 more very, very conservative Republicans to that board. So the battle is far from over, but I know that activists and coalition members who have been our partners in these trenches for decades now will never stop fighting to do our best. So I am now going to show you all a video, and I think someone is going to roll that.
For many of us, this year, 2021, held promise to breathe a little easier, for more stability, and time to move forward. But the constant crusades of disinformation over the pandemic, vaccines, and elections, it has been anything but a sense of calm. In Texas, we've seen the ugliest, never-ending legislative session in our history, as our state leadership exploited the COVID crisis and a deadly winter storm as cover to appeal to the ugliest impulse of their base and erode the very fabric and foundation of our democracy. Despite all that, the Texas Freedom Network continues our unwavering commitment to fighting back. For more than 26 years, we have been on the front lines for change, for equality, for social justice. Throughout the many challenges this year, let us remember the bright moments, moments of resistance, sparks of hope. These are the moments that fortify us, the sparks of hope that remind us that Texas and Texans deserve better. We are resolved to continue to work for a better future.
SB 8 is illegal, point blank, period.
These moments serve as paving stones for the road ahead. Whether it's our young Texas Rising leaders, our Just Texas clergy, or the powerful network of grassroots activists and allies, we are forging a different path forward. At the Texas Freedom Network, we fully understand the challenges that we are facing, and we are determined to persist and push on.
So, thank you. What I want to say about this is to start this next section by saying Texas Republicans and the religious right are terrified of us, and for good reason. We know the dogs bark the loudest when you're closest to the door. So I'm going to say that one more time. We know the dogs bark the loudest when you're closest to the door. That is because the tactics used by those in power and the religious right in our state are just bids for power and control. Their fearful response to a world they see is becoming more liberal and accepting of all religious and non-religious views every day. But we've seen time and time again that our mission to build and deepen our base is working. And even during what can feel like dark political moments in Texas history, our communities are embracing progressive values, and our grassroots organizing is yielding results, cycle over cycle. And we continue to close this electoral gap in Texas. We're excited about what this election brings and what we'll see. And women, people of color, and young voters have been setting those records. So, one thing here, just to talk about some local wins briefly. Reproductive justice wins in cities across Texas. So in June, a day came that we had seen on the horizon for years. Roe versus Wade was overturned. And while our devastation to that is still very palpable, powerful local advocacy has been happening in Texas as we fight for reproductive justice in a post-Roe world. Several Texas cities have held city council meetings to hear from the public and vote on a slate of policies geared towards decriminalizing abortion. Texas Freedom Network and Texas Rising have been on the ground speaking, mobilizing, and advocating for the passage of these pro-choice city resolutions in El Paso and in Austin, while supporting fellow advocates in Dallas and San Antonio. Each one of these cities has ultimately passed their resolutions. And while yes, there was one exception in El Paso, and while that resolution in El Paso, it was a record-breaking tie with the mayor having to vote it down, we are still not backing down, and our Texas Rising activists have hand-delivered now to the El Paso district attorney a letter demanding that the office make abortion cases the lowest priority and pledge not to prosecute or file charges against people who access abortion services or those who help them in their county and city. Young people are mobilizing as well for criminal justice reform. So last year, through this whole process, what we found is if we can elect progressive champions into district attorney positions, they can definitely help with decriminalizing and making certain offenses less of a criminal offense, right? And so those are the solutions that we've been focusing on. So last year, our organizing was instrumental in San Marcos, Texas, with San Marcos becoming the first city in Texas to implement an ordinance that requires police to issue citations instead of arresting people for certain low-level nonviolent crimes. Those are things like decriminalizing marijuana and other offenses. And this is a step towards decriminalizing incarceration. And in Austin, our activists worked to stop Proposition A, which would have decreased the city's police presence while gutting funding from others, would have increased the city's police presence while gutting funding from the EMS and also from the firefighters. And so we were able to reject that plan and win that as well. In addition to that, some vital work we do is democracy from the ground up work. And what we mean by that is that voting is not easy in Texas, and neither is voter registration. And as we saw in our last legislative session, our leaders were determined to make it even more difficult this time around as our numbers grow, right? That's part of that, when the dogs are barking, we're closest to the door, right? So, what we've done there is form a coalition with our partners to advocate for pro-voter reforms at the local level. So the very things we saw in the bill that they ultimately passed and took out were the reforms that we had passed. And so now we're doing it again. We are a very creative bunch of individuals in Texas, and there are lots of ways to continue to create access to voting. So, by doing this work, our campaigns have successfully implemented more than 10 of the reforms that we proposed in various counties, benefiting more than 50% of the state's population. So some of those wins include things like gaining community input about planned locations for polling places in El Paso County, mailing postage-paid vote-by-mail applications to voters in Harris County that were over 65, and making sure poll workers had the necessary supplies to protect themselves in this pandemic against COVID-19 during the last election in Dallas County. We continue to advocate across the state, and in some cases, most recently, we have been able to have county elections administrators support more polling locations in different areas and continue to move that forward while fighting against the bureaucracy that we face with what the Republicans put into the agenda. So another big area is protecting our planet and our communities from the climate crisis, right? So climate change is here, and we're fighting against harmful policies and speaking out against politicians who put profits over people. So in Corpus Christi, we're educating community members and mobilizing voters against harmful dredging, and we're endorsing candidates for city council who will launch a citywide climate action plan to mitigate impacts of climate change. In San Antonio, right here where we are today, our organizers are continuing their efforts to hold the Spruce coal plant owned by CPS Energy accountable for their role in the lives that ultimately were lost during Winter Storm Uri and the environmental damage they continue to cause in this community. We've demanded that the company finally commit to rate transparency and seek equitable energy solutions that would make it possible to shut down this dangerous plant by 2030. And speaking of Winter Storm Uri, we are doing what we can to ensure that Texans' lives are not lost again because of an inadequate power grid and an inept railroad commission. We've endorsed Luke Warford for the Railroad Commissioner, a candidate we know truly cares about Texans, and will create a plan to ensure our grid is fit for winter temps in Texas and Texas summers. So in addition to supporting Luke, that's just like to highlight, I have multiple hats on here, C3, C4, and we are in the midst of an election, and Texas Freedom Network and Texas Rising Action are proud to support a full slate of candidates and endorsements up and down the ballot. And we are out there. We are knocking on doors. We are making phone calls. We are sending those text messages and running lots of digital ads. So I hope you see some of them. These are busy weeks, but we're doing everything we possibly can to make sure that we bring everyone to the polls. So, click. There is one thing I will give Texas Republicans and the religious right, and only one thing. They have a good reason to be terrified of us because we are powerful. They see our progress and our hunger for a better Texas, And in response, they use cheap political tricks to infect Texans with fear and hate, creating distractions and sowing division. And they are distracting us, and as they distract us, they attack our freedoms, and they continue to dismantle and undermine this democracy. It is easy to feel like we are surviving through unprecedented dark times. But being in this work and fighting alongside activists like you who value genuine religious freedom, I cannot help but see all of our slivers of light. Right-wing politicians can keep messing with us, but we are ready. We will keep organizing. It is the people of our movement, you, who will create the change we need. And together, I will be right with you, and we will be relentless in defending democracy for all Texans. Thank you. Thank you for having me today.